You think you know the Elvis food story? It's simple, right? A fried peanut butter and banana sandwich. Maybe some bacon thrown in. It's the legend. The food that defined the king. But that's not the story. That's the cartoon. The real story is stranger. It's weirder. It's about a man whose fame and isolation grew so immense, the only thing he could truly control was what he put on his plate. And what he put on his plate was often a cry for something he'd lost. What happens when a poor boy from Tupelo, Mississippi, who grew up on squirrel and cornbread, can suddenly have anything he wants? Anything at all, flown in on a private jet at 3 in the morning. Does he develop a taste for caviar and champagne? No. He doubles down on the food of his childhood. He magnifies it. He distorts it. He takes the simple comfort of a southern meal and pushes it to grotesque, mythic proportions. This isn't just a list of weird snacks. This is a culinary map of a man's soul. From pounds of burnt to a crisp bacon to a sandwich so decadent, it required a flight to another state. His cravings tell a story of loneliness, of a longing for his mother, of a rebellion against the clean, polished image he was supposed to maintain. Why did he insist his food be killed in the pan? What was he really trying to taste when he ate a combination of foods that would make a normal person sick? Let's go past the peanut butter and banana. Let's look at the meals that truly reveal the man behind the legend. Number 17, was it just a sandwich, or was it a cry for help? The story of the fool's gold loaf is the stuff of legend. It's the peak of Elvis's culinary mythology. It happened on the night of February 1st, 1976. Elvis was at Graceland with some friends, including Jerry Schilling and members of the Denver police force who worked his security detail. They started talking about a sandwich they'd once had in Denver, Colorado. It was a sandwich from a restaurant called the Colorado Mine Company. It was called the Fool's Gold Loaf. The description alone was absurd. It wasn't a sandwich you held in your hands. It was an event. You take an entire loaf of Italian bread, you hollow it out. You slather the inside with a whole stick of margarine. Then you bake it until it's golden brown. Then you fill the cavity with an entire jar of creamy peanut butter. And on top of that, you lay a full pound of crispy fried bacon. Finally, you slather the whole thing with an entire jar of strawberry jam. The loaf is then closed, sliced, and served. The estimated calorie count is somewhere around 8,000. Some have put it as high as 42,000, though that seems impossible. As the men reminisced, Elvis decided he wanted one, not tomorrow, not a copy made in the Graceland kitchen. He wanted the real thing right now. So he did what only Elvis could do. He called for his private jet, the Lisa Marie. He, Jerry Schilling, and 2 of the Denver cops flew from Memphis to Denver. They landed at a private hangar at Stapleton International Airport around 1:40 a.m. The owners of the Colorado Mine Company, Buck and Cindy Scott, were alerted. They personally made 2 massive Fool's Gold loaves, along with a case of Perrier and a bucket of ice. They brought the food out to the jet on the tarmac. Elvis and his friends sat in the hangar for 2 hours eating the sandwiches and drinking Perrier. They never left the airport. When they were finished, they got back on the plane and flew home to Memphis. The entire trip was for a sandwich. The cost of the fuel alone was thousands of dollars. This event is often portrayed as a funny example of rock and roll excess, but look closer. By 1976, Elvis was deep into his physical and emotional decline. He was isolated at Graceland, surrounded by employees. His health was failing. He was dependent on a cocktail of prescription drugs. The spontaneity of the trip feels less like fun and more like a desperate act. It was a way to feel something, to break the monotony of his gilded cage. Food historian and author of The President's Kitchen Cabinet, Adrian Miller, has spoken about how comfort food is often a way to reconnect with a past that felt safer and more authentic. For Elvis, food was memory. The sheer scale of the Fool's Gold Loaf is also telling. It's a caricature of a peanut butter sandwich. It's his childhood poverty food peanut butter made grotesquely large and expensive. It's the ultimate act of a man who could have anything, yet all he wanted was a bigger, more extreme version of the simple things that once brought him comfort. The act of flying 1,000 miles wasn't just for a sandwich. It was an attempt to recapture a feeling, a moment of joy, no matter the cost. What do we still not know about this night? Was the craving a direct result of a specific drug he was taking, something that caused extreme hunger or impulsivity? Did the other people on the plane see it as a fun adventure, or did they recognize it as a deeply troubling symptom of his spiraling condition? And what did Elvis himself think, flying home with a stomach full of 8,000 calories? Did he feel satisfied, or was the emptiness still there? Number 16, why did he need his bacon black? Elvis Presley liked his bacon burnt. This isn't an exaggeration. He didn't like it crispy. He liked it black. He wanted it cooked until it shattered when you touched it. Mary Jenkins Langston, his cook for 14 years at Graceland, described the process in detail. She would have to cook a whole pound of bacon for his breakfast. She'd lay the strips in a skillet and cook them until they were completely carbonized. He would watch her, and if it wasn't black enough, he'd tell her to put it back in the pan. This wasn't just a preference, it was a rule. The bacon had to be practically incinerated. The members of his entourage, the Memphis Mafia, knew this well. They often ate what he ate. They choked down pounds of this blackened pork. Lamar Fike, one of his closest friends, often joked about how everything in the Graceland kitchen was fried to death. So what's behind this? On one level, it's a Southern thing. In the mid-20th century American South, there was a deep-seated fear of undercooked pork due to the risk of trichinosis, a parasitic disease. The folk wisdom was to cook pork until it was beyond well done. This was especially true in poorer communities where medical care was scarce. Elvis grew up in this environment. His mother, Gladys, would have cooked pork this way. So his craving for killed bacon was likely a continuation of how he learned to eat it as a child. It was a taste of home, a taste of safety. But there's a psychological layer too. A preference for extremely crispy or burnt food is a textural obsession. Think about the sensory experience. The sound of it shattering, the intense, almost bitter, smoky flavor. For someone like Elvis, living in a world that had become increasingly soft, controlled, and unreal, the harsh, definitive crunch of burnt bacon could have been a grounding sensation. It was real, it was intense. Dr. Charles Spence, a professor of experimental psychology at Oxford University, has done extensive research on how texture and sound, what he calls sonic seasoning, profoundly affect our perception of food. The loud crunch is a major driver of pleasure for many people. Elvis just took that desire to its absolute extreme. Furthermore, the process of burning food involves a chemical reaction called pyrolysis, which is what happens after the Maillard reaction browning goes too far. Pyrolysis breaks down fats and proteins into simpler, often bitter compounds. This creates a flavor profile that most people find unpleasant. Elvis craved it. This suggests his palate was either accustomed to these strong, harsh flavors from his upbringing, or that he was actively seeking out intense sensory input as a way to feel something through the fog of his prescription drug use. What questions remain? Was his demand for burnt bacon a form of control, a way to ensure his food was prepared exactly to his specifications in a life where he had little control over his schedule or public persona? The carcinogens produced in burnt meat, like heterocyclic amines HCAs, have a measurable impact on his rapid health decline, a factor that 1970s medicine wouldn't have fully understood. And was this obsession with killing his food a subconscious reflection of a deeper, more destructive impulse? Number 15. What was he really tasting in fried dill pickles? Today, fried dill pickles are a staple on gastropub menus, but in the 1950s and 60s, they were a regional curiosity, a strange snack found mostly in the Mississippi Delta and rural South. Elvis loved them. He didn't discover them in a trendy restaurant. He ate them because they were part of the culinary landscape of his youth. The origin of the fried pickle is often traced back to 1963 to the Hollywood Cafe in Tunica, Mississippi, not far from Memphis. But the practice of frying all sorts of things was common in the area long before that. For Elvis, this was not a novelty, it was comfort food. His preferred version was simple dill pickle slices, dredged in cornmeal or flour, and deep fried until golden and crispy. Let's break down the appeal. It's a collision of sensations. You have the sour, salty brine of the pickle. You have the heat and grease of the fryer, and you have the crunchy coating. It hits multiple pleasure centers in the brain at once: salt, fat, and sour. According to research published in the Journal of Physiology and Behavior, the combination of fat and salt is a powerful driver of food cravings, often overriding the body's natural fullness signals. The added sourness of the pickle cuts through the richness, making you want to eat more. For Elvis, this was more than just a tasty snack. It was connected to a specific time and place. Southern food historian John T. Edge, in his book The Potlicker Papers, A Food History of the Modern South, writes about how Southern food is intrinsically linked to identity and memory. Eating fried pickles was a way for Elvis to stay connected to the boy he was before he became the king. It was a taste of Mississippi, a reminder of a simpler, albeit much poorer, life. His love for them was well known around Graceland. They were a frequent late-night snack, something to be eaten while watching movies or talking with his friends. They were easy to make in the Graceland kitchen, a quick fix for a sudden craving. Unlike the elaborate Fool's Gold Loaf, fried pickles were humble. They represented the opposite end of his culinary spectrum, the simple, down-home snack versus the grotesque symbol of excess. But even this simple craving has a darker side. Elvis's diet was notoriously high in sodium. His later health problems, including high blood pressure and heart disease, were undoubtedly exacerbated by his love for salty foods like fried pickles and burnt bacon. Dr. Peter Toth, a leading cardiologist, has noted that the kind of diet Elvis consumed was a perfect storm for cardiovascular collapse. The pickles, drenched in salt and then fried in fat, were a small but significant part of that storm. So what are the unanswered questions? Did Elvis ever eat a fresh vegetable, or was everything he consumed either fried, salted, or killed? Was his craving for the intense sourness of the pickle a way to cut through the palate-dulling effects of his medications? And could this simple southern snack, a symbol of his roots, also be seen as a small daily contributor to the very health crisis that would ultimately kill him? Number 14 was meatloaf, just a meal or his mother's memory. Of all the foods Elvis loved, meatloaf might be the one most deeply connected to his mother, Gladys Presley. She died in 1958 when Elvis was just 23 and at the peak of his initial fame. Her death devastated him. He never fully recovered from the loss, and for the rest of his life, he tried to recreate her cooking. Gladys's meatloaf was the benchmark against which all other meatloaves were judged. According to those who knew him, Elvis would often get frustrated with his cooks, complaining that the meatloaf they made just wasn't like Mama's. Mary Jenkins Langston, his cook, said she tried for years to get it right. He would tell her, "It's good, Mary, but it's not quite it." What made Gladys's meatloaf so special? It was likely a very simple Depression-era recipe. Of ground beef, maybe some breadcrumbs or crackers as filler, onion, and a simple tomato-based topping. In the book, The Presley Family Cookbook, compiled by Elvis's uncle, Vester Presley, the family recipes are notable for their simplicity and reliance on basic, inexpensive ingredients. This was survival food designed to be filling and comforting. Elvis's craving for his mother's meatloaf is a classic example of what psychologists call food neophobia, a reluctance to eat new or unfamiliar foods, and its opposite, a powerful preference for the foods of one's childhood. A 2005 study from the Monell Chemical Senses Center found that food preferences are often formed in early childhood and are powerfully linked to emotional memories. For Elvis, the taste and smell of that specific meatloaf were inextricably linked to the feeling of being cared for by his mother. Eating, it was an attempt to conjure her presence. He didn't just want any meatloaf, he wanted a specific sensory experience. He wanted the texture, the smell, the exact flavor profile he remembered. When the cooks at Graceland couldn't replicate it, it was more than a culinary failure, it was a personal one. It was another reminder that the one person who could give him that specific comfort was gone forever. The story goes that one day, Mary Jenkins Langston finally got it right. Or at least, close enough. Elvis tasted it and said, "That's it, Mary! That's it." He was so happy he reportedly sat and ate the meatloaf for 3 days straight, for every meal. This wasn't just about hunger, it was about finding a lost connection. He had, for a brief moment, found the taste of his mother's love again. What mysteries still surround this craving? Was there a secret ingredient in Gladys's recipe that was lost forever, or was the missing ingredient simply her presence? How much of his lifelong struggle with food and weight was tied to this unresolved grief and his constant, failed attempts to eat his way back to his mother's kitchen? And when he finally tasted the meatloaf that was right, was it a moment of pure joy, or was it tinged with the deep sadness of knowing it was only an echo of the real thing? Number 13. Why did he drink only Pepsi, never Coke? In the world of soft drinks, you're either a Coke person or a Pepsi person. The brand loyalty is fierce. Elvis Presley was a Pepsi man, through and through. It wasn't just a casual preference. Graceland was stocked with Pepsi. His tour planes were stocked with Pepsi. When he was in the hospital, Pepsi had to be brought in for him. He drank it for breakfast. He drank it all day long. This loyalty likely started in his childhood. Coca-Cola, headquartered in Atlanta, has always been seen as the more established big city brand. Pepsi, born in North Carolina, often positioned itself as the drink of the common man, a challenger. In the rural Mississippi of Elvis's youth, Pepsi was often the cheaper, more accessible option. The choice was made for him by circumstance, and it stuck. For him, the taste of Pepsi was the taste of his own upbringing. His consumption was staggering. Accounts from the Memphis Mafia suggest he could easily drink a case or more in a day. This wasn't just for hydration, it was a habit, a ritual. The constant influx of sugar and caffeine would have had a profound effect on his body. Dr. Robert Lustig, a pediatric endocrinologist and an expert on the effects of sugar, has extensively documented how high doses of fructose, the primary sweetener in soft drinks, can lead to insulin resistance, liver damage, and obesity. Elvis suffered from all of these. His preference was so absolute that it became a logistical issue for his staff. When he was performing in Las Vegas, the hotel had to make sure his suite was constantly supplied with cases of Pepsi in small glass bottles, his preferred format. In the documentary, Elvis the Searcher, you can see footage of his life on the road, and there's almost always a bottle of Pepsi nearby. This brand loyalty can be seen as another aspect of his desire for consistency and control. In a life filled with chaos, travel, and unpredictability, the familiar taste of a Pepsi was a constant. It was the same in Memphis as it was in Los Angeles or Las Vegas. It was a small piece of home he could take with him anywhere. It was reliable in a way that people often were not, but the sheer volume of his consumption points to something more than just brand loyalty. It suggests a dependence, both psychological and physiological. The sugar provided a quick energy boost, a temporary lift from the fatigue caused by his lifestyle and his medications. The caffeine was a stimulant. It became part of a cycle, the sugar high, followed by a crash, leading to the need for another Pepsi. This cycle is a well-documented phenomenon studied by neuroscientists like Dr. Nicole Avena, who has researched the addictive properties of sugar, finding that it can trigger the same dopamine reward pathways in the brain as addictive drugs. So, the lingering questions are not just about taste. Did his intense Pepsi habit begin as a simple preference and morph into a full-blown sugar addiction that his doctors failed to address? How did the massive daily intake of sugar and phosphoric acid interact with the cocktail of prescription drugs he was taking, potentially making their side effects worse? And was his rigid insistence on Pepsi only a reflection of his southern roots, or was it a symptom of an obsessive personality trait that manifested in all areas of his life, from his food to his music to his relationships? Number 12. What did a burnt, greasy hamburger mean to him? Elvis didn't just eat hamburgers, he had a specific, almost ritualistic way of preparing them, especially when he was upset. His cousin Billy Smith, who lived on the Graceland grounds, told stories of Elvis's aggravation hamburgers. When Elvis was angry or frustrated about something, a bad review, a problem with his manager, Colonel Tom Parker, he would storm into the kitchen late at night. He would take a pound of ground beef, mash it into a huge, flat patty, and throw it into a skillet of hot grease. He would then take a spatula and press down on the burger hard. He would smash it, letting the grease splatter, cooking it until it was well done, and the edges were black and crispy. He wasn't making a gourmet meal, he was working something out. He was taking his aggression and channeling it into the food. The act of smashing the burger was physical, a release of tension. The sizzling sound, the smell of the frying meat, the violent process of it, it was all part of the ritual. This is a fascinating look at the emotional connection to food preparation. For many people, cooking is a soothing, creative act. For Elvis, in these moments, it was a destructive one. He wasn't nurturing the food, he was punishing it. This goes back to the theme of killing his food, which we saw with the burnt bacon and his preference for overcooked vegetables. It seems he often wanted to remove any trace of rawness or life from his meals. The hamburger itself was a symbol of American simplicity. But Elvis's version was, like so many of his other cravings, an extreme. It wasn't a juicy, medium-rare burger. It was a greasy, flattened, burnt-edged disc of meat. According to the book Graceland's Table Recipes and Recollections from the Home of Elvis Presley, his favorite way to eat these burgers was on a bun with nothing but mustard and onions. Simple, harsh. No soft lettuce or sweet ketchup. This craving tells us about his inability to express his anger in more direct ways. He was trapped by his own fame. He couldn't just have a normal argument. He was surrounded by employees who depended on him. So, He took his frustrations out in the kitchen in the middle of the night on a piece of ground beef. It was a safe way to be angry. The questions that remain are deeply personal. What specific frustrations led to these late-night cooking sessions? Were the aggravation hamburgers a regular occurrence, a secret ritual that only his closest family knew about? And is there a link between this need to physically dominate and kill his food and the deep-seated anger and frustration that simmered beneath his public persona for so much of his adult life? Number 11. Was spaghetti a taste of a world he never knew? Elvis Presley was a man of the American South. His diet reflected that. Fried chicken, collard greens, cornbread. But one of his favorite dishes was surprisingly Italian spaghetti and meatballs. This wasn't a sophisticated, authentic bolognese. It was a thoroughly Americanized Southern-style version of the dish. His preferred recipe was simple. The meatballs were made of plain ground beef, and the sauce was rich and thick, but not particularly complex. What made it Elvis style was what he added at the end. He liked to have his spaghetti served with the meatballs on the side, not mixed in, and he would often add his own toppings like extra cheese or even chopped up hot dogs. This was his way of taking an exotic dish and making it his own, domesticating it to fit his southern palate. His love for spaghetti might have come from his time in the army, stationed in Germany from 1958 to 1960. There, he would have been exposed to a wider range of European foods than he had ever encountered in Mississippi or Tennessee. While spaghetti is Italian, its Americanized form was a staple comfort food for GIs far from home. It was a taste of something different, yet familiar enough to be comforting. This period was also right after the death of his mother, a time of profound grief and change for him. New foods might have been a welcome distraction. Back at Graceland, spaghetti and meatballs became a regular part of the meal rotation. It was a dish that was easy to make in large quantities for his entourage. It was filling, cheap, and satisfying. But Elvis was particular about it. According to his cook, Mary Jenkins Langston, if the sauce was too thin or the meatballs too spicy, he wouldn't eat it. It had to conform to his specific memory and preference for the dish. There's also the simple comfort factor. A big bowl of pasta and meat sauce is a universally recognized comfort food. It's warm, savory, and carb-heavy. For a man whose life was incredibly stressful, a dish like spaghetti offered a simple, uncomplicated pleasure. Research in the field of nutritional psychology suggests that carbohydrate-rich foods can boost serotonin levels in the brain, which has a calming, mood-improving effect. It's possible that Elvis was, consciously or not, self-medicating with food, using carb-heavy meals like spaghetti to manage his anxiety and mood swings. But what don't we know about this particular craving? Did his love for spaghetti and meatballs start before the army, perhaps from a local Italian-American restaurant in Memphis? Was the addition of hot dogs his own quirky invention, or was it a trick he picked up from someone else? And did he see this dish as a connection to a wider, more cosmopolitan world that he only ever got to glimpse? A world beyond the deep-fried confines of his southern upbringing. Number 10. Could chow mein really have been his favorite? This is perhaps the most surprising food on the list. Amidst all the fried southern comfort food, Elvis reportedly loved chow mein, specifically the kind you'd get from a small local Chinese-American restaurant. This seems completely out of character with the rest of his diet. But according to Jerry Schilling, one of his closest friends, Elvis would get intense cravings for it. In his memoir, Me and a Guy Named Elvis, Schilling recounts how Elvis would send him out late at night in Los Angeles to pick up chow mein from a specific restaurant in Chinatown. It had to be a particular kind, not too spicy, with plenty of crispy noodles. This wasn't a one-time thing, it was a regular craving, especially when he was on the West Coast making movies. So, where did this come from? It's a reminder that Elvis's life wasn't spent entirely at Graceland. From the mid-1950s through the 1960s, he spent a great deal of time in Hollywood. California, in that era, had a thriving and diverse food scene, very different from Memphis. He was exposed to new flavors. While he mostly stuck to his comfort foods, it seems that Americanized Chinese food managed to break through. The appeal of chow mein for Elvis might have been textural. Like the burnt bacon and fried pickles, it had a satisfying crunch from the fried noodles. It was also salty and savory, hitting the same flavor notes as much of his other favorite foods. Americanized Chinese food is also famously comforting. It's often greasy, salty, and sweet, a combination that is highly palatable. For Elvis, it might have been a safe way to be adventurous. It was different, but not too different. This craving also shows a different side of Elvis. It punctures the myth of him as a man who only ate peanut butter and banana sandwiches. It shows he was capable of trying and liking new things. His world was small in many ways, but it wasn't completely closed off. The fact that he developed a taste for chow mein suggests a flicker of culinary curiosity. However, the questions it raises are fascinating. Was there a specific person who introduced him to Chinese food? Perhaps a co-star on a movie set. Did he ever try other Chinese dishes, or was chow mein the only one he liked? And was this a craving he only had in California, a Hollywood food, or did he try to have his cooks at Graceland replicate it? And if so, what did that southern fried version of chow mein taste like? Number 9, why did he insist on killed vegetables? Elvis Presley liked his vegetables cooked until they were limp, colorless, and completely devoid of any crispness. He wanted them killed. This was a common instruction he gave to his cooks. For green beans had to be boiled for hours with a piece of salt pork until they were mushy and gray. Cabbage was cooked until it was translucent. There was to be no bite, no al dente. This preference is deeply rooted in traditional Southern cooking styles of the time. In an era before modern refrigeration was widespread and with concerns about foodborne illness, vegetables were often cooked for extended periods as a safety measure. Furthermore, long, slow cooking was a way to break down tough greens like collards and turnips, making them tender and infusing them with the flavor of the pork they were cooked with. For generations of Southerners, this was simply how vegetables were supposed to taste. Elvis grew up eating vegetables prepared this way by his mother Gladys. For him, a crisp, bright green vegetable would have seemed foreign and wrong, possibly even raw and unsafe. His palate was formed by this style of cooking, and he never deviated from it. His demand for killed vegetables was another way he sought to replicate the food of his childhood and the comfort of his mother's kitchen. From a nutritional standpoint, this method of cooking is devastating. Boiling vegetables for long periods destroys many of the water-soluble vitamins, like vitamin C and the B vitamins. While he was technically eating vegetables, he was getting very little of their nutritional benefit. This, combined with his high-fat, high-sodium diet, contributed to a state of being simultaneously overfed and undernourished. He was consuming a massive number of calories, but was likely deficient in many essential vitamins and minerals. This craving is another piece of the puzzle of his declining health. His diet wasn't just about excess, it was also about a profound lack of actual nutrition. The irony is that the cooking method he found most comforting, the one that connected him to his mother, was also stripping his food of the very nutrients his body desperately needed. What are the lingering unknowns here? Did any of the doctors who treated him ever try to address his diet, or did they focus solely on prescribing medications for his symptoms? Was his aversion to crisp vegetables so strong that he would refuse to eat a meal if they weren't cooked to his liking? And does this preference for dead food reveal something deeper about his psychological state? A desire to consume things that were safe, predictable, and utterly devoid of life and vitality. Number 8, was coconut cake a taste of celebration or sadness? Elvis had a serious sweet tooth. While jelly donuts and Eskimo pies were common snacks, his favorite dessert, especially for celebrations, was coconut cake. But not just any coconut cake. It had to be a specific kind, a fluffy white cake with creamy white frosting and a thick coating of shredded coconut. His love for this cake was legendary among his friends and family. It was often the cake of choice for his birthday. His aunt, Delta Mae Biggs, who lived at Graceland for many years, was known for making a version he loved. The cake represented moments of joy and celebration in a life that was often marked by loneliness and routine. The flavor profile is pure Southern comfort. Coconut became a popular ingredient in Southern baking in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, seen as a slightly exotic but accessible luxury. A beautiful multi-layered coconut cake was a sign of a special occasion. For Elvis, a boy from a poor family, a fancy cake like this would have been a rare and wonderful treat. His lifelong love for it was likely a way of holding on to that feeling of specialness. In the later years of his life, however, his consumption of sweets became more compulsive. He would eat cake late at night, often along with other snacks and his customary Pepsi. The celebratory dessert became a part of his regular unhealthy diet. The sugar rush provided a temporary lift, a brief moment of pleasure in the long, often boring hours at Graceland. According to a 2012 study in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition, high sugar intake is linked to depression and mood swings. The cycle of a sugar high followed by a crash can exacerbate underlying emotional issues. It's possible that Elvis was caught in this cycle, using sweets like coconut cake to manage his low moods, only to have them contribute to the problem in the long run. The questions that remain are poignant. Was there a specific happy childhood memory associated with coconut cake that he was trying to recapture every time he ate it? As his health failed, did the act of eating his favorite cake become tinged with sadness, a reminder of happier birthdays and better times? And did the people around him see his increasing consumption of sweets as a harmless indulgence or as another worrying sign of his self-destructive behavior? Number 7 were black-eyed peas, his link to a simpler faith. Every New Year's Day at Graceland, the menu was the same black-eyed peas and hog jowls. This wasn't a quirky Elvis preference, it was a deeply ingrained Southern tradition. Eating black-eyed peas on New Year's is thought to bring good luck and prosperity for the year ahead. The hog jowls, a fatty cut of pork, represent wealth. For Elvis, this tradition was non-negotiable. It was a connection to his roots, to the folk traditions and superstitions of the South. No matter how famous he became, he was still a boy from Mississippi, and on January 1st, he ate black-eyed peas. This ritual was a way of grounding himself, of participating in a cultural practice that was bigger than his own fame. The dish itself is humble. Black-eyed peas are cooked long and slow, usually with a piece of pork for flavor. It's simple, earthy, and nourishing. It's the opposite of the glitz and glamour of Las Vegas. This annual meal was a symbolic return to basics, a culinary reset button. It was a reminder of where he came from and the values he was raised with. While Elvis was also a deeply spiritual man, though his beliefs were a complex mix of his Assembly of God upbringing and a lifelong search through various spiritual texts. The simple, almost ritualistic act of eating a traditional meal for good luck connects to this part of his personality. It's a small act of faith, a nod to the idea that there are forces in the world beyond one's own control. As his life became more chaotic and his health more precarious, a ritual that promised luck and prosperity might have held a powerful appeal. Food historian and a scholar, Jessica B. Harris, has written about the deep cultural and historical roots of African American and Southern foodways. Black-eyed peas have been a staple in the South for centuries, with roots in West African cuisine. By participating in this tradition, Elvis was connecting to a long, complex history, whether he was conscious of it or not. But what do we still wonder about this tradition? Did he truly believe in the superstition, or was it more about honoring the memory of his mother and the way he was raised? As he became wealthier than he could have ever imagined, did the ritual of eating for prosperity take on a new, more ironic meaning for him? And in his final years, when his luck seemed to be running out, what did he think about as he ate his New Year's meal? Number 6, what was the secret behind his jelly donut obsession? Elvis loved jelly donuts. He could reportedly eat a dozen of them in a single sitting. This wasn't a casual snack, it was a serious craving. There are numerous stories from the Memphis Mafia about being sent out at all hours of the night to find a donut shop that was still open. His favorite was a classic raspberry-filled donut, preferably from Krispy Kreme. The combination of the soft, yeasty dough, the sweet glaze, and the tart jelly was irresistible to him. This craving fits perfectly into his overall food profile: soft texture, high in sugar and fat, and intensely comforting. One of the most famous stories involves a craving he had while on tour. He wanted Krispy Kreme donuts, but there were none to be found nearby. His manager, Colonel Tom Parker, ever the showman, reportedly had a box of them flown in on a private jet for him. This story, whether completely true or exaggerated, illustrates the extent to which his every whim was catered to. If Elvis wanted a donut, he got a donut, no matter the cost or logistical difficulty. This kind of enabling is a key part of Elvis's story. He was surrounded by people whose job it was to give him what he wanted. This applied to food, to cars, and, most tragically, to prescription drugs. His donut craving is a relatively benign example, but it's part of the same pattern. No one ever told him no. No one suggested that maybe a dozen donuts wasn't a good idea. His cravings were treated like royal decrees. From a physiological perspective, a massive dose of sugar from a dozen donuts would cause a huge spike in blood sugar and a corresponding surge of insulin and dopamine. This creates a powerful, albeit temporary, feeling of pleasure and energy, a sugar high. For someone dealing with chronic fatigue, depression, or the side effects of medication, this rush could be highly addictive. The craving wasn't just for the taste, it was for the chemical effect it had on his brain and body. So, what are the unanswered questions about this simple pastry? Did his donut cravings become more frequent and intense as his drug use escalated, suggesting a link between the two? Was there a specific emotional trigger that would send him in search of a box of donuts? And how did the people around him, the ones who procured the donuts for him, really feel? Were they happy to please the king, or did they see it as another sad step in his slow, sugar-fueled self-destruction? Number 5 was eating squirrel a source of shame or pride? Before the fame, before Graceland, before the private jets, there was poverty. The Presley family was, for much of Elvis's childhood, desperately poor. They lived in a 2-room shotgun shack in Tupelo, Mississippi. They often struggled to find enough to eat. In this environment, you ate what you could get. And for the Presleys, that sometimes meant squirrel. Squirrel, along with other small game like rabbit and possum, was a common source of protein for poor rural families in the South. It was free, it was readily available, and if you knew how to cook it, it could be made into a hearty meal. Gladys Presley would have likely prepared it stewed or fried, trying to make the tough meat tender. Elvis rarely spoke about this part of his childhood publicly. It's a stark contrast to the image of abundance and excess that defined his later life. But his early experiences with food insecurity undoubtedly shaped his relationship with food forever. His later tendency to hoard food, to always have a fully stocked kitchen, and to eat in massive quantities can be seen as a direct reaction to his childhood hunger. He was making sure he would never be hungry again. His experience with eating squirrel is a powerful symbol of that early poverty. It's a food that is now seen by many as strange or even repulsive, but for him, it was once survival. Biographer Peter Guralnick, in his definitive 2-volume work Last Train to Memphis and Careless Love, paints a vivid picture of the poverty of Elvis's early years. This context is crucial to understanding the man he became. His later extravagances were not just the whims of a rich man, they were the actions of a poor boy who could suddenly have anything he wanted. Did Elvis ever eat squirrel after he became famous? It's unlikely. It was a food of necessity, not of choice. But the memory of it, the food ghost of that time, surely lingered. It represented a past he had escaped, but one that was always a part of him. The questions this raises are profound. Did Elvis feel a sense of shame about his hillbilly upbringing and the foods he had to eat to survive? Or did he, in private moments, feel a sense of pride in how far he had come? And how did his early experiences with hunger affect his physical health in the long term, perhaps predisposing him to the metabolic problems he suffered from later in life? Number 4 was cottage cheese and peaches, a failed attempt at health. Amidst the landscape of fried, fatty, and sugary foods, there is one recurring dish that seems strangely out of place: cottage cheese with peaches. Elvis would occasionally go on health kicks, attempts to lose the weight that plagued him for much of his adult life. During these periods, this simple, relatively low-calorie dish would become a staple. This was likely his idea of a dit food. Cottage cheese is high in protein, and peaches add sweetness without a huge number of calories, as long as they weren't canned in heavy syrup, which they often were. In the diet culture of the 1960s and 70s, this combination was a popular choice for people trying to slim down. It was a fad, and Elvis, like so many others, bought into it. The problem was that these health kicks were never sustainable. They were periods of extreme restriction, followed by a return to his usual habits of extreme indulgence. This cycle of crash dieting is notoriously ineffective and can be harmful to one's metabolism. According to the National Institutes of Health, dieting can lead to muscle loss, increased appetite, and long-term weight gain. Elvis was a textbook case. His attempts at dieting show a man who was deeply unhappy with his physical appearance. He was a sex symbol, an icon of youthful rebellion. The pressure to maintain that image must have been immense. As he aged and gained weight, he became more reclusive. The cottage cheese and peaches represent a sad, failed attempt to turn back the clock, to regain control over a body that was failing him. It also shows the limits of the nutritional knowledge of the time. His doctors and trainers put him on these simplistic, restrictive diets without providing him with the tools to make lasting lifestyle changes. They treated the symptom, the weight gain, without addressing the root causes: his emotional eating, his grief, his addictions, and his profound loneliness. The unanswered questions are heartbreaking. Who was advising him on these diets? Were they qualified professionals or just well-meaning friends and employees? Did he ever come close to achieving a healthy, sustainable relationship with food? Or was he always caught in the cycle of binging and restricting? And did he genuinely enjoy the cottage cheese and peaches, or was every bite a miserable reminder of the foods he really wanted to be eating? Number 3. Why did he need his biscuits drowned in gravy? You cannot talk about Elvis and Southern food without talking about biscuits and gravy. It was a cornerstone of his diet, but in typical Elvis fashion, it had to be done to an extreme. He didn't just want gravy on his biscuits, he wanted his biscuits swimming in it, drowned. He wanted a bowl, not a plate. His preferred gravy was a classic Southern sausage gravy, a thick, white, peppery sauce made from a roux of flour and sausage drippings, with milk and crumbled sausage mixed in. The biscuits had to be homemade, fluffy, and warm. The combination is a caloric bomb, a heavy, starchy, fatty meal designed to fuel a day of hard manual labor. Elvis ate it at any time of day, often as a late-night snack. This dish is pure, unadulterated comfort. It's warm, soft, savory, and incredibly filling. For Elvis, it was a direct link to his Southern home, to breakfast with his mother. The act of smothering the biscuits in gravy can be seen as a metaphor for his own life. He often felt smothered by his fame, by the demands of his career, by the people who surrounded him. In his food, he sought out that same feeling of being completely enveloped. The sheer quantity is what sets his craving apart. He didn't just have a biscuit or two. He would eat an entire platter, a whole bowl full. This points again to the psychological roots of his overeating. It wasn't just about satisfying hunger, it was about filling a void. The physical feeling of being stuffed, of being so full you can barely move, can be a way to numb emotional pain. It's a temporary state of oblivion. This dish, more than almost any other, contributed to his weight gain and cardiovascular problems. It's a perfect storm of refined carbohydrates, flour in the biscuits, and gravy, saturated fat sausage and milk, and sodium. Eating this regularly is a recipe for high blood pressure, high cholesterol, and heart disease, all of which Elvis had in spades. What do we still not know? Was there a specific family recipe for biscuits and gravy that his cooks were trying to replicate, just like the meatloaf? Did he ever express any awareness that this food was contributing to his poor health, or was he in a state of complete denial? And is it possible that the physical heaviness of the meal was something he craved, a way to feel physically grounded in a life that felt increasingly unreal and out of control? Number 2, were Eskimo pies a link to a forgotten childhood joy? Elvis loved ice cream, but he was very specific. His favorite was the Eskimo pie, a simple block of vanilla ice cream on a stick, coated in a thin layer of chocolate. He always had them in the freezer at Graceland. He ate them constantly. The Eskimo pie was one of the first chocolate-covered ice cream bars, patented in 1922. By the time Elvis was a child in the 1930s and 40s, it would have been an affordable, popular treat. For a poor kid in Mississippi, getting an Eskimo pie from the local store would have been a moment of pure, simple joy. It was a small luxury in a life that had very few. His lifelong devotion to this specific brand is another example of him clinging to the foods of his youth. He could have had any fancy ice cream in the world. He could have had gelatos flown in from Italy. But he wanted the simple, mass-produced Eskimo pie. It wasn't about the quality of the ingredients, it was about the memory associated with it. His consumption was, of course, excessive. He wouldn't eat just one. He'd eat several in a row. It was another high-sugar, high-fat comfort food that he used to self-soothe. The combination of the coldness of the ice cream and the sweetness of the chocolate is a powerful sensory experience. The cold can have a numbing effect, both literally and emotionally. This craving also highlights the arrested development that many people saw in Elvis. He was a man who, in many ways, never emotionally grew past his teenage years. His tastes, his hobbies, his relationships, they all had a youthful, almost childlike quality. His love for a simple kid's treat like an Eskimo pie fits this pattern perfectly. He was the king of rock and roll, but in his private moments, he was just a boy who wanted some ice cream. The final, unanswerable questions are tinged with sadness. Did he ever share an Eskimo pie with his daughter Lisa Marie and try to pass on that simple joy to her? Was his craving for this childhood treat a way of connecting with the innocent boy he was before fame changed everything? And in the end, was he just a lonely man standing in front of a freezer in the middle of the night trying to find a moment of peace in a bar of frozen vanilla and chocolate? So number 1, was the fried peanut butter and banana sandwich the beginning of the end? We have to end here with the sandwich that started the legend. the fried peanut butter, banana, and bacon sandwich. It's the most famous of all his cravings, and it's the perfect encapsulation of his entire food story. It starts with poverty. Peanut butter was a cheap source of protein, bread was a filler. It was a simple filling meal for a poor family. The addition of banana made it a treat. The frying, the bacon, that was the Elvis touch, that was the magnification, the push towards excess. He took a humble sandwich and made it decadent. The preparation was key. 2 slices of white bread, creamy peanut butter, a sliced, very ripe banana, sometimes strips of that burnt bacon. Then the whole sandwich was fried in a skillet with butter or bacon grease until the bread was golden brown and crispy, and the inside was hot and melted. It hits all the notes, sweet from the banana, salty from the bacon and peanut butter, fatty from the grease and butter, soft on the inside, crispy on the outside. It's a sensory masterpiece of comfort food, and for Elvis, it was the ultimate taste of home magnified to a kingly portion. This sandwich has become a symbol of rock and roll decadence, but it's really a symbol of something much sadder. It's the taste of a poor boy trying to comfort himself. It's the physical manifestation of his philosophy: if something is good, more of it is better. This philosophy applied to his food, his music, his entourage, and his drug use. It was a philosophy that brought him great success and ultimately led to his destruction. This one sandwich tells the whole story. It's the story of a man who could have anything in the world, but all he really wanted was the food his mother used to make, just bigger, richer, and more extreme. It was a desperate attempt to fill an emotional void with calories, and in the end, the comfort it provided was fleeting, but the damage was permanent. What are the final questions we are left with? Did Elvis himself invent the addition of bacon and the frying method, or was it something his mother did on special occasions? Did he know on any level that the food he loved so much was killing him? And if he could have had one last meal, would it have been this sandwich? Or would he have traded all the fried peanut butter and banana in the world for one more simple, healthy meal with the mother he missed so dearly? The food is gone. The man is gone. Only the questions and the legend remain.